is to set the level of interest rates.
Making sure that prices remain stable over time.
That's right. And having stable prices creates confidence. It makes it easier to save and invest. If you go shopping in a few months' time, things will cost roughly the same as they do now. Also, companies invest more, helping the economy to grow and creating jobs.
And that must make a country more prosperous.
You see, an increase in this little fellow can be a problem for the economy. He can even make people lose trust in their money, which is why we at the European Central Bank and the Euro system take our mission so seriously.
Euro system?
That's the European Central Bank and the national central banks of the countries in the Euro area. But you know, that's not all we keep an eye on.
Really?
Yes. You see, this is deflation.
What's that then?
Deflation is a general decrease in prices.
Sounds great.
No, it's not. You see, just like inflation, it can also damage the economy. For example, if all prices are steadily declining, you'll delay buying something, expecting it to cost less a week later and even less a month later. For the same reason, a company might decide to postpone its investments, and the economy would suffer.
These little guys are destructive.
And what is the primary objective of the European Central Bank and the Euro system? Well?
To maintain price stability.
Good.
And to combat the inflation monster.
Well, I suppose you could call it that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the European Central Bank's point of view. And of course, it would be easy to make fun of a cartoon, but unfortunately, their view is a little bit cartoonish in a lot of ways, as we'll see. I want to start, though. We'll come back to this in a little bit, but I think I'd rather start with the United States, since this is where we live, where the problems aren't quite as bad. But let me just say that, you know, one of the main lessons from this little cartoon, other than that the European Central Bank only cares about price stability, you notice there wasn't any unemployment monster in there, that if you think about the problems that they're facing today, you know, 10.8% unemployment, for example, they all could be resolved with a different macroeconomic policy that is expansionary. And the European Central Bank can actually create money in order to do that, as the Federal Reserve has done here. And the reason they don't do that is the reason, or at least what they would tell you is the reason, I wouldn't agree that it's necessarily the real reason, is inflation, you see? So it is very important. This is a different angle than I usually take in explaining this, but I think it's important because that is the ultimate argument that they come back with when you say, why can't the governments, you know, the European authorities, which is the European Union, the European Central Bank, and the IMF is now part of that troika as it's called, why can't they do anything to restore full employment or something close to it in Europe, in the Eurozone? And they would say it's because of inflation. And so we will come back to that. First, let's look at the United States, because here you also have this idea that again, we can't really do much more than what is done. In fact, President Obama doesn't even get credit for the stimulus that actually did help save, you know, somewhere between 1.3 and 2.8 million jobs in the United States. Now, it turns out that stimulus was much too small. It was, if you subtract off the cuts in the budget cuts and the fiscal tightening of the states, the total stimulus of government, including the federal government and the states and local governments together, was about 1/8 the size of what we needed just to counteract the bursting of the housing bubble, the lost demand that we had in the United States from the bursting of an $8 trillion housing bubble. So you see, that's the problem here. The stimulus wasn't big enough. And of course, you wouldn't really get this from the press. In the press, there's kind of a debate whether the stimulus did anything at all. And that's not the debate that economists have, because it's recognized among economists, at least 90-something%, that it actually did help. So the question then is, well, why couldn't we have more of that? And that's where you run up against this kind of ideology, because the idea is that we would run into unsustainable debts, unsustainable national debt. That is, we would have to borrow in order to do that, and the debt is already too big. Can you pass me those papers there? I meant to read a quote from there. Because this is even President Obama's budget, for example, which, you know, contains some good things, including the tax increases on the upper income people over $250,000, and it also and a proposal to tax capital gains as ordinary income, which both of those would be significant. But in terms of creating jobs for the 25 million people in the United States that are still unemployed or working involuntarily part-time or have given up looking for work, that's the U6 definition from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. In other words, includes all those groups, and that's about 14.5% now. You know, the president's budget doesn't really do anything much for them, because it actually reduces real spending as compared to the prior fiscal year. So no more expansionary policy, no more stimulus. And so, you know, at this pace, even the good job growth we had prior to last month, if you look at those previous 3 months where we were adding jobs at over 200,000 a month, we don't get back to something we could call full employment until 2019, if we're lucky. So that's, you know, a huge, I mean, I don't have to tell you, anybody here who knows anybody who's unemployed or has known anybody, this is a serious human and social cost for people in the United States, and it's unnecessary. Now, just so you know, I want to quote from Obama when he presented this budget. He said, and this was in February, "I'm proposing some difficult cuts that, frankly, I wouldn't normally make if they weren't absolutely necessary. But they are. And the truth is, we're going to have to make some tough choices in order to put this country back on a more sustainable fiscal path." So you see, and I'm not picking on him, because obviously the Republicans are much worse. You know, the House, I mean, Representative Ryan just proposed a budget that would cut all, according to the Congressional Budget Office analysis, which is, you know, that's bipartisan, the Republicans have the House. That would cut all federal discretionary, it would end up cutting all federal discretionary spending other than the military. So in other words, no, it doesn't have room for really any, if you assume that the military spending is not going to go, you know, disappear, basically, you don't have a federal court system or federal funding for the National Institute of Health or really anything at all.